Thanks for tuning into episode 6 of Tales of the Albums on the Wall. This episode, I'm going to be discussing the last LA Explosion. This is such a significant, I'd say life-changing album for me. I've covered it on my Beach Blanket Fort Bingo podcast when I did an interview with Joe Nolte, the leader of the band. I've also written about it for discussionsmagazine.com. This is significant because in late 77, early 78, when I got into new wave and power pop and mod and punk and post-punk, I was buying stuff on major labels, all domestic titles. I'd never bought anything on an independent label before because in my mind, independent label meant, the guy that was at the swap meet that played 2 or 3 instruments and he was selling his album. I mean, I didn't know until much later that's, there's a distinction there between independent and private pressed albums. I love private press stuff now, by the way. But I always thought that, well, if they're on an independent label, that means they're not good enough to be on a major label. Look, I was, let's say 78, 79, I was 14, 15 years old. So I wasn't really understanding anything. I knew I loved the music, but I just didn't know how labels worked. As one day in Licorice Pizza, I was flipping through the albums. This is summer of 79, I think. And I stumbled across this album by The Last called LA Explosion. The cover immediately caught me, and I'm thinking, oh, well, God, that looks kind of cool. I turn it over, I go, Bomp Records. Bomp? That's an independent label. Can't be that good. So I'd put it back in the bin. And I'd go through the bins a little bit more, and I go, oh, but that does look like it might be something I might like. So I'd go back and I'd pick it up, and I'd read the lyrics, because the lyrics were printed on the back of the album jacket. And I'd go, no, I'm not going to get it. And I'd go, and then maybe a couple days later, I'd go back to Licorice Pizza. I'd pick it up and look at it. And it finally got to the point where I thought, you know what, this looks like it might be really cool, and I might really like it. I'd heard of the band at that time, but I don't think that I'd seen their independent singles. And this was going to be the first time I was going to experience this band. So I listened to the record, and it blew my friggin' mind. The songs were amazing. The arrangements were amazing. I mean, this is stuff that I felt like, wow, this is a lost record from the 60s that nobody else has heard except me. And little did I know, there's still, a lot of Last fans in LA and Orange County. But out of my record collecting friends, I was the only guy that knew this album and knew of the band. So the songs were melodic. It went from garagey to just pure Beatlesque pop. Joe Nolte was the singer-songwriter. His brother David was in the band. His brother Michael was in the band. A great keyboard player and arranger and flute player, Vitas Madurai, was in the band. And Jack Reynolds was on drums. And the production was a little thin, but the songs were just so amazing, and I was immediately hooked. And, you think to yourself, well, why is that significant? I'm sure you felt that way with The Jam and Yachts and Buzzcocks and stuff. And yeah, that's true, I did. But because of The Last, it opened my mind to independent labels and independent artists. I didn't realize it at the time, but a lot of the British stuff that I was buying was actually, used to be independent labels, but then they would be sucked up by major labels and released over here. It took me forever to figure that out. But then again, by the time this came out, I hadn't yet turned 16. And it was such a life-changing experience for me. The album's 40 years old now, came out in 79. This is the CD version, of course, and it has the full album as well as bonus tracks. You might be asking yourself, well, you could have, grabbed another independent album and it would have had the same effect on you. No, because this thing was so filled with great songs that hit me just at the right time. If you haven't heard it, give it a spin. Again, if it's in your collection, pull it out and play it again. It's just one of those albums, had such an impact on my life, and that's why it's up on the wall. And it tells me a story every time I look at the album cover. But that's it with this episode of Tales of the Albums on the Wall. I appreciate you hanging out. And until the next time, smell you later.
Take a look around and you'll see what I mean. It never could have been 10 years should be flying